it's still considered hazing, even if they're half the size. Here's a look at the Trick or Treat Studios' Josh Hasties, Candy Corn, Jacob Atkins, and Dr. Death. Trick or Treat Studios is proud to present the officially licensed Candy Corn 3.7-inch figure 2-pack. When a group of bullies take their annual Halloween hazing of a local outcast, Jacob Atkins, too far, he is resurrected to seek revenge against those who have wronged him. When you're pulling tricks like this, you can imagine the treats you'll get in return. Just before, of course, we get a closer look at the Candy Corn, Jacob Atkins, and Dr. Death 3.7-inch figure 2-pack. Let's grab the tape measure first and see how tall the figures stand. I'd also as well like to thank the folks over at Trick or Treat Studios that were kind enough to provide the samples we could have a look at. Unfortunately, though, some sad news. I draw my tape measure away. The figure set has sold out over on their site. It was $24.99, but you can also be notified when the stock becomes available again. Dr. Death is the smaller of the two figures. He's actually only about 3 inches in height, or the figure, I would say, about 7.5 centimeters tall. Jacob is the taller of the two. He's actually about 3.5 inches in height, or the figure's about 9 centimeters tall. Why we are looking at the figure so far away like this is because we did also get ourselves another Jacob Atkins that was part of the Scream Greats, also released from Trick or Treat Studios. Size-wise, completely different line. If you are favoring more of the 7-inch scale figures, then the Scream Greats Jacob Atkins from Candy Corn is a great-looking figure. The smaller scale figures, don't overlook them, though, just because they are a little bit smaller in stature and they are a little bit more limited in articulation. They're still fun figures to have in your collection. We have already looked at a couple of other ones also as well here on this channel, bringing in now both Isaac and Malachi. These were part of the retro 3.7-inch figures from Children of the Corn. Bringing the camera a little bit closer so you guys can see the figures and their accessories. The first thing we'll look at is the tiny red bound book that comes included with Dr. Death. The book, though, may look familiar to you because it just happens to be the same mold shared with the one that comes included with Isaac. I can't expect them to use a brand new mold if obviously you have characters that are carrying around books. Why not just use the exact same accessories? Isaac's, though, was bound in black. Obviously, Dr. Death is painted very nicely here in red. I can't help but also notice that Dr. Death's book is a little bit dingier, though, in the actual pages. Isaac seems to keep his book a little bit more pristine. He carries the book around only on one side. If you actually pick up the character, you'll notice that on one side he has a relaxed hand, so he really only has one gripping hand to hold the book. Getting the book in his hand can be a little bit difficult, just because its thumb, I've noticed, is always one that kind of gets pushed in when you're trying to actually get the book in his hand. But once you get around his thumb, he holds the book extremely well. Let's just take this out of his hand right now because I just don't want to lose it. The detailing done to Dr. Death, first of all, his face is fantastic. If you're not as familiar with Candy Corn, Dr. Death is basically one that's running the carnival, and maybe where they had to approach the more earthbound colors for the Isaac and the Malachi, they really get the chance to kind of shine with all the paintwork that they put into Dr. Death. His very colorful face, of course, painted there in white. In white, you of course got the little pupils there, nice little additional white that they've also painted on the tops of his head, giving him those little hands that he has on the top of his top hat. It's a really nice looking head sculpt. Equally well painted, too, is his jacket. Some nice uses of yellow there. Got some stripes added in there as well, not to mention his bow tie. For a figure that's really as small as he is, he's painted extremely well. That may have also been something I also mentioned when we looked at the Children of the Corn. Funny enough that we're looking at Candy Corn and Children of the Corn, but when we looked at both Isaac and Malachi, I said that even then, those figures were really well painted. This guy just gets a little bit more of the brighter colors, but again, really well painted. He's limited, of course, to articulation only in just the head, so his head rotates all the way around. His arms as well rotate all the way around. And you can also bend his legs as well. Not that you could necessarily put him inside of a vehicle, because, of course, the jacket is harder plastic on the back, but at least he has the means to move his legs back and forth. None of them, by the way, have pegals on the undersides of their feet. So with Dr. Death, I did notice that if you try to put him down standing, you kind of want to make sure that his legs are a little leaning forward. If you have him further back, you'll notice that with his feet, they're kind of angled forward like this. If you have the feet or the legs angled further backwards, he has a little bit of a harder time standing and he kind of topples over. You just want to kind of make sure that you bring the legs a little bit further forward, and Dr. Death should stand perfectly fine. Then on to Jacob Atkins. Jacob Atkins does also come include his little candy dish. He's carrying around trick-or-treating dish. As you can see, it's bringing in the one that we got here from the silver screens. It's the exact same style, although with this one, the smaller one, it's much darker in color. kind of like the darker orange that they've used here. Inside, you won't find candy actually in either one of the cases. And where maybe the silver screen would have went the route of using a rope, they actually just decided instead to actually use this as a molded black plastic handle. I just find it actually is a lot easier, and it holds in his hand extremely well. Just go ahead and take yourself Jacob Atkins. Now, again, like Dr. Death, he has one relaxed hand on one side, so he only has really one gripping hand. And you just take yourself the little trick-or-treating pail. Pail was the word I was thinking of, pail. And just clip that easily into his hand. If you're having a hard time, by the way, trying to get the pail into his hand, one thing you can do, similar to Dr. Death, is kind of bring his hand a little bit more closer together. Don't hang it as much from his thumb. It's a lot easier to actually hang it from his fingers. And he holds it. Like I said, he holds it pretty good. Removing the pail and just putting it off to the side for right now, getting a closer look at Jacob Atkins. Again, nice looking head sculpt. One thing I will say, though, about this head sculpt that maybe wasn't the case when we looked at, oh, sorry, didn't mean to startle you, when we looked at the Silver Screens version of him, is that the Scream Greats version of Jacob Atkins had a lot more use of oranges and yellows. I kind of like the more paler approach that they went with more with the retro 3.7-inch version of Jacob Atkins. Kind of like the more paler expression. I mean, certainly, first of all, you can't see as much as eyes, but he's also got like around the mask here, he's got these lighter little patches of like a creamy beige that the larger one didn't have as much of. I think between the two, it's a creepier looking head sculpt for the smaller scale version of Atkins. Of course, the rest of his body is somewhat similar. He still has the blood-soaked shirt, still has the pinstripe jacket, alternating colors of both the red and that beige-colored yellow. It's torn off at the bottom, similar, although it's, again, just a slightly smaller figure. And again, his articulation is pretty much going to be the same as Dr. Death. Just before, of course, we get a closer look at the articulation, one last time to show you guys the stellar-looking sculpting of this guy. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like with the smaller version of Atkins, I think that the way they've painted the face is a little bit nicer. It looks a little bit more to me like a skeleton. Maybe that's why I like it so much. But again, like, it's a really well-painted figure. They went with more kind of a clear finish over top of this to kind of give the jacket more of a wetter look. Still has the staining on the inside of his shirt. He's got stain all over his hands as well for blood. And again, just a really nice-looking figure. Now, again, for his articulation, his head's going to rotate only back and forth. I can't quite pull off fully rotating it all the way around. It seems to get a little bit more hung up. The arms do rotate still all the way around. And again, like Dr. Death, you can hinge those legs forward and back. There is obviously a very much of a stopping point where it can't get beyond the point of the jacket. Obviously, the jacket's going to be just draped over the back of the figure's body. But again, like if you wanted to, you probably could have him in a seated position. But like Dr. Death, because he has the jacket that comes further down, this is all harder plastic. There really wouldn't be a way to have the character sitting inside of any vehicles. Nice looking figures, though. And again, bringing back in the earlier looked at ones from Children of the Corn. Both Malachi, if I can get him to actually stand. Malachi, when we did the review of him, I did mention, like, with his leg, it has to be kind of bent back a little bit more. And of course, there is also Isaac. We will be, by the way, in an upcoming review, not to tip my hat too early, but we will also be looking at the Haunts 3.7-inch scale figures. Unfortunately, though, some sad news is while I do think that the Candy Corn, the Children of the Corn, not to cross the Corn paths, but while Malachi and Isaac are still available, I think, over on their site, Candy Corn's Dr. Death and Jacob Atkins have sadly sold out. The price for what they were going for was $24.99. But again, you can always put down, I think you can also put in your email and be notified when they're going to be in stock. Let's hope they get stocked real soon, because actually there's a really charming aspect to all these figures. They're smaller in size, yes. They're well painted, still good. And again, because again, they only have limited articulation on them, they do kind of remind me of the old vintage toys that you would have gotten from the 80s. Granted, Candy Corn, funny enough, wasn't around in the 80s, but doesn't mean we can't appreciate really cool retro toys, courtesy of the folks over at Trick or Treat Studios. The fact that these retro 3.7-inch scale 2-pack figures are going for $24.99 may have also something to do with the reasoning why Jacob Atkins and Dr. Death have sold out. I don't know whether the other figure sets have sold out, but for $24.99, these are great figures not only to have out on display, but also to keep them sealed. I'm almost even tempted, once they have these back in stock, to not get a second set of these so I can have them displayed inside their packaging. Just as good as the figures are the packaging that they come included with, because they have a little bit of that retro vibe going for them. I do wish in a way that they could have made the packaging collectible friendly. In other words, so that you can have actually opened up the packaging, took the figures out, had them on display for a little bit, and then you could have put them back inside of a clamshell. But I suppose the charm that goes along with these being retro figures is the fact that as well, the packaging is one of those blister cards on the back of a cardboard backing. Once you cut them open, there's really no way to putting the figures back in unless you very carefully cut the bottoms of these. Both the characters look fantastic. Whether you are a fan of candy corn or not, there's something to be said about the fact that having these smaller scale 5-point articulated figures may not appeal to everybody, but if you are one that grew up in the days of having vintage figures that had only 5 points of articulation, these figures, again, might be right up your alley. Big thank you once again to the folks over at Trick or Treat Studios that did provide the sample of Josh Hasty's Candy Corn 3.7-inch scale, Jacob Atkins, and Dr. Death. Couldn't even get that all out. If you guys are interested, like I said, would like to check out their site, I'll provide the link down below in the video description. In the meantime, though, if you guys did enjoy this video, I want to throw it a like. Of course, if you guys did love the content and you want to stick around for more, if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button down below, turn on the bell notification, all that fun stuff. And of course, the most important thing is coming back on a regular basis, because we have wrapped up things right now for Candy Corn, but we may venture off into the territory of haunts. Those figure reviews will be coming your way. So of course, making sure you're come back on a regular basis. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.